You look at school choice and educational issues across the country. When you look at North Carolina, how do we stack up?
Well, I think North Carolina, relative to other states, so we're talking about a low bar here, but relative to other states, is actually doing a pretty good job on school choice, private school choice in particular. And so you have, I think it's 3 programs here. Plus, you just said your 529 savings accounts can be used for K through 12 education. They used to only be for higher education. So relative to other states, North Carolina seems to have embraced school choice and school choice programs. I've also looked at North Carolina just in terms of private school enrollment, and actually had big increases in private school enrollment since 1990-92 or 91-92. A lot of that then also, that means without these programs. And so North Carolina is doing a good job of getting people access to private schools who want it. A lot more work to be done. And I think the state is doing that work, even as, you always hit bumps in the road. But if you compare North Carolina to some states like New Jersey or New York, where private school choice programs are just anathema, they're not making any progress. North Carolina's doing a lot better than those states. There are a few states, though, they're probably even further along in embracing school choice than North Carolina. You think of Florida, probably first and foremost. You think of Arizona. Nevada had been making progress, but they took a step back. But probably Florida, Arizona are the 2 big ones. Wisconsin had been making a lot of progress, but they've taken a bit of a step back. But North Carolina is doing well, but still so much more work to do, because the norm, the default, is still you go to a school you're assigned to based on your home address.
We're going to get into what North Carolina can do to help make even more access to school choice. But first of all, remind us from your perspective, why is choice important?
Choice is important for many reasons. The one I think is most important, and my thinking on this has kind of changed over the last 15, 17 years that I've been working on this. And I'm sort of embarrassed that it took me so long to reach this conclusion. The first reason we want school choice is we are supposed to be a society. The United States of America is supposed to be grounded in liberty, in freedom. And freedom means, in education, people able to choose schools that they think are best for their kids. And that can mean pedagogically best for the kids, but it also means schools that share their values. And so that they don't have to fight with other people to impose their values on them, because they all have to fund one government school in their district, or they have to fight at the state level because the state now tells all public schools what to do. We want school choice because a free society demands school choice. It demands the freedom to choose different things, and public schooling doesn't allow that. And that's the first reason we want school choice. And we ought to go beyond calling it school choice. We ought to call it educational freedom, because increasingly you can choose educational options that don't happen in school. Online, you can get therapies and like with horses, all sorts of stuff that goes beyond schools. But then there are all the sort of traditional arguments too, that a free market leads to competition, enabling educators to decide how they want to educate, lets them compete. It also drives innovation, and it's more efficient and it's more accountable if you have to respond directly to the people who want your service. So there are all those really crucial reasons for it, but reason number 1 is a free society should have an education system grounded in freedom.
You heard the words educational freedom. Neal McCluskey is director of the Center for Educational Freedom. It's located at the Cato Institute, the libertarian group. You mentioned also earlier Florida and Arizona as sort of the standout states. What could North Carolina do to get a little bit more like them?
Well, I mean, there's a lot that goes on in those states. Already you probably have people there who may be a little bit more inclined to freedom, to which would include school choice. But they've also, I think, made good pitches for school choice. And that includes talking about, if we have school choice, we also need to reduce the regulations on traditional public schools, enable those traditional public schools to be competitive, because some of them don't want to just exist because you have to go there. They want to have the ability to do new and different things and compete with schools of choice. But they're often bogged down with rules and regulations. And certainly in Arizona, they've talked about, let's free everybody up to do different things. And in Florida, I think they've had similar discussions. But it's also important that they often elect people who tend to be friendly to school choice. And in Florida, they have had the benefit of Jeb Bush was their governor, very pro-school choice, and he continues to stay active in Florida, arguing for, campaigning for school choice. And there are a lot of groups that want it that are very active. And so I would recommend that people in North Carolina who want school choice, you've got to constantly be fighting for it and making the argument for it. And that argument, first and foremost, should be about free people should be able to choose the education they think is best for their kids.
That leads into the next question, which is that we have seen elected recently in the last cycle some people who've been more hostile to choice or at least skeptical. What are some of the best ways to make that case to them that, look, this is not D versus R, conservative versus liberal. This is something that everyone should be able to get on board with.
Right. Well, I mean, first we say it's freedom for everybody, and that's really important. This, I'm sure, gets touchy, and I'm not an expert in North Carolina politics, but I think of, for instance, the bathroom bill issue that really was kind of front and center in North Carolina. Instead of saying, well, we should require everybody either to have schools that don't allow a student to choose a bathroom or do, if you're either side of that debate, what you should want is a system where you can choose a school that shares your values. That may mean a school that says you choose the bathroom. It may mean you choose a school that says, no, we have traditional assignment to bathrooms. What we shouldn't be doing is saying, let's have a system where we're all forced into conflict. And that is what public schooling is when there are differences. You have to fight for who's going to get what they want out of the schools everyone has to pay for. The other kind of more mundane issue is people want school choice, and then they hear someone say, well, if there's school choice, it's going to take money out of your public schools. And we've got to explain to people better that even if money leaves your public school, one, it forces them to compete. And research has shown repeatedly that forces them to get better. But also that rarely does so much money leave a student that there isn't money left over, where there's actually more money per pupil in the school that they've left. And people love the idea of class size reduction and that having more money per pupil, which means more resources per pupil. And that point has to be emphasized over and over because people are initially scared when they hear money will be leaving their schools. But if they hear more resources for their child, if they stay there, that's something that people think is great. And we need to emphasize it.
In the brief time that we have left, is there one particular item in the school choice front that you see for North Carolina that this is something you ought to move toward?
Well, I mean, North Carolina already has a lot of programs, and I'm always hesitant to tell states you should add another program because it gets pretty confusing to people when they're confronted with a bunch of programs. We do tend to like, based on the research, scholarship tax credit programs, and in particular, we have the idea, other people have had it, but you now have education savings accounts, which is the idea of not just you could use the money for a private school, but you could use it for, if you're a homeschooler, you could buy curriculum, buy computers, all sorts of things that go beyond just the school. We actually have some model legislation for a tax credit funded ESA so that the money never comes from the state, because what we've seen is money that comes from a state, people tend to say, well, you got to regulate it because that's my tax money in part. A tax credit funded ESA, people would choose whether or not to donate to groups that set up these savings accounts, and they can choose to whom they send that, just like a regular scholarship tax credit, only now for an ESA. That's really kind of the most freedom for funders we think you can get, and we'd like to see that. But certainly the state shouldn't jump into another program because once you have too many, people start to get very confused what they're looking at.